Shalom and namaste, everyone. Welcome to this great event put together by Stand With Us in coalition with the Hindu American Foundation and Hindu Pact. It's really an honor here to have a great large attendance, really a tribute to our shared collective history of over 3,000 years and a billion people worldwide. We have a lot to cover today, and I want to give a warm welcome to our panelists, and I'm going to introduce them one by one. Thank you. The first panelist I'm going to introduce is a friend for a very long time to both the pro-Israel, pro-India, Hindu, Jewish community, and a leader in academia, Dr. Nathan Katz, a distinguished professor emeritus from the School of International and Public Affairs at Florida International University. He's held many distinguished positions there, including founding chair of the Department of Religious Studies. He started a program there bringing in Jewish studies, later Asian studies, Jain studies, the study of spirituality. And he is the best known scholar on Indo-Judaic studies, the history of the Jewish communities in India. He's written a landmark book on that subject and hosted many forums on that. And now that he's a professor emeritus, he has started a program to lead Jewish interest tours in India, along with his wife. So we welcome Professor Nathan Katz. We're also honored today to have Matan Zamir, the Deputy Consul General at the Consulate General of Israel to the Pacific Northwest. He grew up in Jerusalem, where his family has lived for 9 generations. He was in Israel's Foreign Service, served as Deputy Chief of Mission at the Israeli Consulate in Mumbai, and has a decorated career in the Israeli Defense Forces. He's also received the President's Medal of Excellence for his service. Thank you again, Deputy Consul Zamir, for joining. Samir Kalra, a colleague of mine at the Hindu American Foundation, is the managing director at the Hindu American Foundation. He's a lawyer. He holds a Juris Doctorate from Santa Clara University School of Law, is licensed to practice law in California, and he oversees the Hindu American Foundation's programs and policy advocacy initiatives, and has led human rights fact-finding missions and advocacy programs, spoken at congressional briefings on human rights in South Asia and at the British Parliament, and published dozens of papers and articles on human rights, foreign policy, immigration, testimony, etc. He's spoken at the California State Assembly and Senate committee hearings on education and hate crimes, and currently is very active on issues particularly in California, where he's based. Thank you again, Samir, for joining. And finally, I would like to introduce Adva Vilchinski, the Consul for Public Diplomacy at the Consul General of Israel in New York, also holding a distinguished career, former political advisor of the Israeli Consulate in New Delhi, in India, and prior to joining the Israeli Foreign Ministry in 2015, she was in academia and foreign aid, serving as the country director in the Philippines for Israel's famous and leading aid organization called Isra Aid. And during her time there, she led the organization's activities in the Philippines following Typhoon Yolanda. Welcome to all our panelists. And at this time, I'm going to hand it back to Peggy to get the program going from here. Thank you very much. Shalom, namaste. It's going to be great.
Thank you so much, Minhir. I'm Peggy Shapiro. I'm the Midwest Executive Director of Stand With Us, and I'm going to be starting off with a few questions. Now, I could only ask a scholar like Dr. Nathan Katz to cover 5,000 years in about 5 minutes, but he is excellent. So I wonder, can you, Dr. Katz, can you tell us a little bit about India and Israel, and there's thousands of years of ties to a land, and how the ancient connections to these lands are 2 pictures that sort of look like each other a little bit, but how this connection to the land contributed to the cultures.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Peggy. As Mir mentioned, I lead tours and Jewish interest tours, all kinds of tours. And I remember one time as a Jewish group, and we were in Bali, and we were showing them a Hindu temple. And the people are mostly liberal Jews, and they cannot relate to this temple at all. They don't know what's going on. And I tell them, when you look at this temple, don't think of your synagogue, but think of the temple back when, in Jerusalem, Solomon's temple. They got it then. Let me back up and come to it. If you took a world religions course in college, or if you just read around it all, you will find out there are two kinds of religions, essentially the Western monotheisms and the Eastern fill-in-the-blank religions. If you get more sophisticated, we call them Abrahamic, perhaps, and Dharmic religions. But that's a distinction is a geographic distinction. It's useful because the Abrahamic religions share common paternity, a transcendent monotheistic idea of God, a sense of history, so on and so on, however much they differ. However, there's another way to slice the pie, and that is, don't think about Eastern and Western religions. Take that out, and instead I'm going to ask you to think about older and newer religions. That is as crucial a distinction and as meaningful as what we said about Eastern and Western religions. So newer religions grow out of older religions. Hinduism and Judaism are the mother religions for almost everybody. Ultimately, whether you're a Jain or a Buddhist, whether you're a Christian or a Muslim, you go back to your mother religions. But whereas the original religions are specific to a place and a people, the newer religions have to distinguish themselves, and they come out to be non-locatable in space. What I'm saying in a fancy way is, we have a holy land. We Jews, we Hindus, if I may include myself in that. You, the rest of you, you don't. So you go around the world, good, and your idea is to spread your teachings to all the people. That can be very well motivated, but it hasn't always worked out well. So the first distinction there is the newer religions are missionary-oriented and so-called universalistic, whereas the older religions are tied to a land in a way that may be difficult for some to appreciate. We all have our legends, we all have our Torah, we all have our Puranas, we all have our stories about the great figures in our history, whether gods or human, whatever they are, the great feats, the revelation of Sinai, of Krishna and Radha, of Manu and the flood, we all have those great stories. The difference is, for us Jews and for you Hindus, those stories took place in the land that in principle is ours today. It's in principle, if not in fact, where we live. So what that means is we build temples, sort of permanent seeming fixtures, and they don't always work out that way. And in those temples, we do a certain kind of religious activity, and we tend to go on pilgrimages in that land. That is the land itself, as the sacred space where the sacred history took place, has a unique sanctity. So I'm
going to...
yeah, please, go right ahead, Peggy.
I could listen to this forever, because actually you brought up things I didn't know, and I tried to prepare for today. Well, Israel and India are thousands of miles apart, and you think they would be worlds apart. Mm-hmm. But there are yet some shared spiritual traditions, some rituals. I found those two young boys with what looked like kippahs on their heads, common religious symbols. We only have a little time, but can you touch on some of the common religious symbols?
Sure. So let me just go back a second. So in these temples, we had similar religions. We had a priesthood who performed sacrifices. The priests performed the sacrifices on behalf of the people, connecting the people to the God, and they did so in a divine sacred language, Hebrew or Sanskrit. So you see, So the religious behavior is temple-centered on the manifest level. On the internal level, and here we'll get to those profound similarities you mentioned, Peggy, in the home, both develop the public space for worship and ritual and pilgrimage, but they also develop in the Griha Sutras, in the home form of the religion. We get a life that is centered upon the family. The education of one type or another is for everybody, though certain kinds of what higher education might say, or for certain people, not everyone. We emphasize purity of lineage, purity of family life, and we have these religions that mark our passage through our lives in life cycles. So home-centered family religions on one hand, pilgrimage, public, sacrificial, priestly religions on the other. And the other thing, two other things, we're both very tolerant, really. We can quote the terms, but the oldest religious text in the world, the Rig Veda, says truth is one. The wise people call it by different names. That is, there is one underlying core of religion, which we humans, through our historical experience, speak about differently. Jews don't say it exactly the same way, but we say in Pirkei Avot, all the righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come. The world to come means the highest goal of human life. So if we fulfill our duties, if we behave in an ethical and righteous manner, we get to the same goal. So one thing about which religions, these two religions agree wholeheartedly, is that the endpoint of religion is the same for everyone, regardless of affiliation. Contrast that to the missionary character of the newer religions, and there you get the widest yawning gap. And also the source, I think, of the greatest respect and affection that in my personal travels around India than you could find. We resemble you, and we don't try to push ourselves on you at all, and we don't push ourselves on anybody. We're good neighbors in that sense. We don't want you to move into our house. The last thing that I want to mention, Peggy, is the concept of God, because that's has been and for most Jews is still the big issue. We're monotheists and they're not. And that gap seems absolutely unbridgeable. And our Torah is filled with a lot of invective about what they call avodah zarah, which means the religious ritual, avodah zarah, that is strange to us, that is foreign to us. That gets translated through centuries as idolatry, which I think misses the point. Never mind that. So in 2007, quite recently, the Hindu Dharma Acharya Sabha in India, obviously, invited the chief rabbinate of Israel to come to India, where they would meet intensively for several days in New Delhi, and they did. And the year later, the rabbis invited the Swamis to Jerusalem, and they met there for several days. And on each occasion, amazing, the rabbis and the Swamis issued a joint declaration. And point number one in what the Swamis and rabbis agreed upon and believed to be very significant is that we worship the same God who created the universe and who, for his own reasons, creates humans to approach him through different paths. He creates us differently, though it's the same God. Well, 2007, not long ago, that event in time, I believe, because it takes time for these groundbreaking ideas to really gain traction on the street, in the streets, as it were. These two groundbreaking ideas have changed theoretically the position of Judaism about Hinduism profoundly in an entirely positive way. As that, as I say, gets widely accepted, that whole bugaboo, which is all I think it was, about idolatry in Hinduism, it goes out the window. You see, I've studied Hindu texts in original languages for decades. I know what the different theologians say about God. And when I read that, I can connect it to what our teachers, that what Chazal say, what our rabbis say, what our mystics especially say about God. And they're absolutely non-contradictory. I had one student, last point, very ambitious guy. I love my students. And he just got so caught up with some of my thinking. I want to write my master's thesis on Shankara, the greatest monistic, non-dualistic philosopher of India, 8th century, and Maimonides, a similar time, 12th century, the greatest figure in medieval Jewish philosophy, because they both had this concept of God as utterly transcendent, no attributes, no form, no activity, pure being itself. They agree completely. No hands, no eyes, no love, no redemption. No, God is God, and it's up to us to attain God. So Shankara and the Ramban are very close. Now, my poor student, I said, all right, you really want to do this, you got to do it the right way. So here's this Pandit, I knew a Kashmiri Pandit who lived here, go and start some Sanskrit. Just get a couple of years worth done, and I can work with you. He did. And he comes back, oh, he's very proud. Okay, he did learn. I said, okay, now you got to learn about the same amount of Hebrew in order to compare it to the Sanskrit. He was game, very predictably, and I'm sad for it. I was rooting for him, but he didn't finish. Ended up finding a shortcut to get him his degree anyway. But that's the kind of thinking we need. So I hope, Peggy, that touches on
amazing. And I know that in my files, I have that 2007 agreement. Mm-hmm. If someone has it available on their computers now, and you can just put it into the chat for everybody, that's great. If you can't, then I'll thank everyone who's attended today, and I'll attach it to my thank you note, because it's very, very interesting to read the chief rabbi of Israel and the leading figure in Hinduism together. The agreements they reached on many, many points mm-hmm. were amazing, and it would be surprising, I think, to most. So I hope everyone has their seatbelts on, because we're going to move very fast, thousands of years, and from the ancient past. So we have some common concerns. And it's not just our links in the past, the connection to the land, but it's what's happened in Israel. We had the rise and fall of various empires and conquerors, from Romans to Ottomans. And, when the Ottoman Empire was defeated at the end of World War I, it was ceded to the victorious Allies, who they carved out nations. They took a ruler and a pencil, and they carved out nations, not looking too closely at what the border might be as an issue. And we got Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. And Great Britain was entrusted with the mandate for what was called Palestine, the land. And the mandate recognized the historical connection of the Jewish people with this area of Palestine. By the way, the Romans named it Palestine because they were so angry with the Jewish rebellion that they wanted to name it after the Jewish enemies, the Philistines, and it became Palestine. And so Great Britain was called upon to facilitate in this establishment of a Jewish homeland. But the first intention got changed. Then they cut off 3/4 of what was supposed to be mandated for a Jewish homeland and created Jordan and gave the Golan Heights to the French mandate. And when the UN Assembly adopted a resolution to partition Palestine, it left Jews with 13% of the original mandated land, but they said, okay. And on November 29th, 1947, Britain announced termination of its mandate. Enough problems, they're leaving. It was going to take place May 15th, 1948. The day before, State of Israel declared its independence. The next day, it was attacked by 5 Arab armies. So we've had years of siege and attacks, and you read the news, you turn on the TV, you know about it. So India and Israel, they gained their modern independence within 9 months of each other. How were the historical environments which led to this independence, and I gave it as fast as I could. How are they similar or different? And what were some of the consequences of British colonial rule for India?
So great question, Peggy. Before I answer that, just want to wish all my Hindu friends a happy Hindu New Year, which is today, and also say namaste and shalom to everyone, and thank you for joining the program. So that's a great question, and probably a day long or more discussion. I'm going to try to just give a very brief synopsis in a couple of minutes. So I think there are a lot of similarities, and I would divide up the implications of colonial rule into the external security environment and the neighborhood, and then the internal implications that it has had on India and Indian people and Hinduism and the representation or interpretation and views of these people. So we're talking about the security environment. India was similarly born in conflict. Even prior to independence on August 15th, 1947, the British played a mischievous role in dividing the land and partitioning India. There was a drive to create the separate Muslim state of Pakistan, which was led by the Muslim League political party, but they wouldn't have been able to gain the prominence and effectiveness without the help of the British. That much earlier started promoting this political party when they didn't have a lot of support, started promoting the idea of separate electorates for Muslims, even before the time of independence partition came. So the seeds had been planted. Obviously, the Muslim League played its own part, but the main similarity is that the traditional land of India was partitioned in 1947. It was born into conflict, not 5 days later, but a couple of months later. India also started its first of 4 official wars with Pakistan on October 22nd, 1947. When the Pakistani army, in conjunction with tribal raiders from the Northwest Frontier Province, invaded the erstwhile Kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir, which at the time hadn't decided whether it wanted to stay independent or join Pakistan or India. It was leaning towards staying independent, but Pakistan invaded, and then the Raja, or the king of Kashmir at the time, sought India's help to intervene. And that led to the first official conflict at that time. Now, if we look at the division, going back for a minute, in terms of the land, you have the western and the eastern wing of Pakistan that were created. The eastern wing is now known as Bangladesh, and both had bloody partitions. Both have had bloody histories of violence and conflict. I mean, and you've seen a drastic decline in the Hindu populations in both these areas. In Pakistan, in 1947, you had about 15% of the population, West Pakistan, that was Hindu. And then after partition in 1951, the first census that was conducted showed about 2% of the population was Hindu at the time. Similarly, in Bangladesh, or in the eastern part of Pakistan at that time, it was around 31% Hindu in 1947. And in 1951, that number dropped drastically. Sorry, 1961, that number dropped drastically to 19%. So we saw a real decline in the Hindu population. Now, while we did see a large influx of Muslims from India into the east and western parts of Pakistan, you also saw a simultaneous rise in the Muslim population in India. So many Muslims stayed because India was created as a secular republic. It was not created on the basis of a religion, even though obviously it has a majority of Hindus. It has robust and large minorities. And so the Muslim population has, in fact, increased since partition, and is now, I think, and at the time of 1951, it was about 9.8% of the population, and today it's 14.23% of the population. So some of the division that you saw at the time were already there, but the British helped to emphasize those and to create artificial boundaries that divided the land, the ancient land of India. You saw a number of conflicts that resulted as a result. After the initial invasion and 1947 war, India then fought 3 more successive wars with Pakistan in 1965, in 1971, and 1999. Now that, of course, does not account for the constant proxy war that's been waged by Pakistan in India since partition. So you have the actual open warfare between militaries. Then you have proxy warfare, much similar to what Israel has been facing from some of its Arab neighbors and other states in the Middle East since its independence also. So I think there's a lot of similarities there. And I don't know to what extent Israel has seen this, but the other major implication of British colonialism has been how it's created a colonial mind, a colonized mind for many Indians and Hindus, because the British wrote Indian history. The British created categories and divisions when they looked at Indian society without really any context. And they created these divisions based on what they, as a foreign Portuguese term known as caste, and social divisions. They created divisions based on what they considered to be martial races versus other races within India. So they created a lot of these divisions that are still having implications on how history is viewed in India today, in terms of how Indians view themselves and the different categories. And also, theories about, the beginning of ancient Indian civilization that still impact, we see it in today's textbooks. And here in America too, not just in India, here in America. So the implications have been, really since 1947, we've seen those continue till today. Even though India has gained its independence, physical independence, the question is whether it's gained its intellectual and mental independence from British colonial rule. Now there is, I think, a lot of moves to address that much more in the last 6 to 7 years. But that is still a lingering implication of British colonial rule that still Hindus and Indians are dealing with.
I think you've touched upon a point that deserves its own session, and that is the writing of our own history and not letting other people rewrite our history. But maybe that'll be our next session, because I think it's a very, very important point, because the person who controls history controls destiny. So I think that is a topic to discuss. But in the midst of all these problems and siege and artificial boundaries and all that, you have India and Israel as tolerant islands in a sea of intolerance. And I want to look at the role of women in India and Israel. They are among the first nation of women leaders. Can you, Adva, I'm going to ask you, because you're from Israel, but you spend a lot of time in India. What is your impression of the role of women and women's rights in both countries?
Hello, and thank you, everyone. Peggy, that's a great question. And I think not only I'm from Israel and I lived in India for a while, I'm also, just by a coincidence, a woman. So it's a perfect question for me. I have to be honest. Before coming to India, many Israelis doing their big trip after the army to India. I chose South America, but then destiny brought me to my big trip as part of the mission with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I was shocked. I was shocked because in every meeting that I went with ambassador, I saw women, like the women were ministers, the women were chief ministers. And everything that I thought I knew about India before, which I didn't know nothing, was just a big surprise, because you might hear or you might see over TV and culture different things. And then when I arrived, and from a meeting to a meeting, from a state to state, women opened the door, women spoke with me, and of course I was thrilled. And I think it has a lot of, you showed some slideshows. Women both in Israel and in India have a significant role with building independence, with struggling, protecting borders. I think also for us in the Israeli embassy in New Delhi, we felt very comfortable in this area of women in India, because it was funny because we had even an article about that. During my 3 years in India, all of the diplomatic team, a part of the ambassador, they were all women. all of our, like the diplomats from Israel, we were all women. And I think it contributed to the great connection between Israel and India, because I think women has a different added value that they could bring to the table. And it was so important to have it. So in this regard, again, I was so happy. And it's not only in politics, it's in literature, it's journalists. It's really all over the place. And even, the real people, the way I experience India a lot is by traveling, not for work, just for fun, to understand and to speak with the people. And you see how strong women in India building, families and protecting their society and environment. And that's something that really relates to Israel as well. And we were very proud to work with a lot of women organizations, with the women chapter of FICCI in India, and with as well, we sent women leaders to conferences, and we'll speak about Mashav later, but to come to Israel and to share the knowledge of women and education. And that's an experience that, as a woman, I will never forget.
Yeah, that's great. Now, it relates to my next question, and I know both countries have minorities. I mean, I think Israel has 65 different ethnic groups living there, and I know there are many minorities, and for a long time there were Jewish minorities in India. Matan, can you tell, and then maybe Samir, you can chime in. How do both countries handle the rights of minorities?
Yes, thank you, Peggy. Before I do that, let me compliment you, because I see over 200 attendees on the chat, and I think it's a great testament for the work you do and Stand With Us. A great testament to the work Samir and Mihir is doing with HAF. But I think first and foremost, it's a great testament to how people are interested to learn about each other and to engage with each other. So that's really great. So you asked about minorities in Israel, and I think when I go to campuses here in the United States and I talk to them about Israel as a diverse country, people, I think there's this stereotype or this notion that Israel is basically 9 million people that look like me, which is a terrible thing to even think about. And when you actually learn about Israel, Israel is extremely diverse. We have 20% of the population in Israel. Out of those 9 millions are Arab Israelis. Out of them, we have Muslims, Christians, we have Druze, Cherkessi, and out of the 80% that are Jewish, we have ultra-Orthodox, we have secular, we have traditionals, the Jews that came to Israel from Russia, from Ethiopia, from Morocco, and then from India. In India, out of those 1.4 billion people, the Jewish community used to be a micro community, right? Only at the peak of it, it was a little over 100,000 Jews in India, mostly in the greater Mumbai area, Thane, and a little bit in Pune. And we can do a whole 3-hour sessions about the Jews of India and talk about the different community, what's the difference between Baghdadi Jews and Bnei Israel and Kuchini Jews. And then today, it's not even a micro community in India, it's a nano community, right? It's tiny. There's about 5,000 Jews left, again, mostly in Mumbai and Thane, that area, still live a very rich Jewish life in modern India. A couple of years ago, the Jewish community have received an official minority standing in India, which is a huge, groundbreaking process that was led by the Jewish community, but also by the Indian government, who after many years have decided to grant the Jewish community the status that helps them with college admission and a lot of other statuses when it comes to the everyday life in modern India. And a lot of those Jews, out of those 100,000 who some of them moved to the United States, some to Canada, Australia, found a way in Israel. And in a very special way. I think it has to do a lot with the way that they lived in tolerance and in coexistence in their home country, in India. They were able to blend perfectly into the fragment of life in Israel, because for every wave of allegation, for immigration, there's challenges, whether to assimilate too strongly and then you give up your own identities, or you keep your identities in a very strong way, and then you lose some of the Israeli or the new countries' ways of, basically bonding into the society. And I think the Indian wave of immigration find a really nice middle ground in which they kept a lot of the customs and traditions and food and culture. They still watch the Bollywood channel on TV, but they do a lot of other stuff. But they were also very much in the Israelis from very early on. So that's a very good model of how you move from one country to another and then still keep your identity.
Samir, do you want to make a short
absolutely.
comment on that?
Actually, the one thing that kind of stuck out was the demographic profile that Matan gave. And interestingly, in India, the religious demographics are somewhat similar in that slightly less than 80% is the current Hindu population in India. And then you have the other religious minorities, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Jews, Baha'is. Actually, the largest Baha'i population lives in India. And I think one of the largest temples is in Delhi, the Lotus Temple, which is the Baha'i place of worship. Buddhists, and many other religions living harmoniously in India. And I would start at a high level where I'd say that this concept of how India treats minorities is based on the Indian civilizational and Hindu ethos of pluralism, where, I think Dr. Katz touched on it before, there are many paths to the divine or to God. And there are many different ways and conceptions of how to view life. And that has allowed, different groups to come seek refuge in India, whether that was the Jewish community, whether that was Zoroastrians, whether that was Tibetan Buddhists, whether that was Afghan Muslims during the civil war in Afghanistan. Many have come to India, have assimilated, have become part of the fabric of India, have contributed tremendously, and have been accorded and received full rights as Indians. And India's legal system and constitution actually goes further than what we think of as a secular democracy in the Western context does, in the regards that, as Matan mentioned, some groups are afforded minority status, which allows them to access certain government programs and funds and get support. The Christian and the Muslim community have their own separate personal laws, own personal religious laws in India that allows them to follow their own religious practices. And so we have this idea of not just the diversity of people, but this acceptance and this beyond accordance of equal rights, but actually giving many accommodations, providing separate laws, allowing minorities to really flourish in India. And the Jewish community, as Matan mentioned, is now minuscule, but the impact that they have left is still there. Interestingly, in 1971, during the Bangladesh Liberation War, where India intervened and helped Bangladesh achieve independence from Pakistan and helped to stop the Pakistani genocide against ethnic Bengali Hindus in Bangladesh. One of the leading army generals, JFR Jacob, who was a chief of army staff for the Eastern Command, was Jewish. And he was hailed for his contributions in helping achieve liberation for Bangladesh in that war and helping win the war. And he was actually given a medal for his contributions after the war. So that was kind of a fun tidbit and connection there. But again, India is one of the few places in the world that the Jewish community has never been persecuted. There has never been anti-Semitism. That they haven't had to hide their identity. And I believe there are still 35 synagogues, if I'm not mistaken, that are in India, different parts of India. So I think, not just, generally minorities, how they have survived and thrived in India, but the Jewish community in particular, I think, is a real wonderful example of not just the ties between our civilizations and our people, but how minorities have contributed and been part of the fabric in India for generations.
So that's another very important commonality here. And you know, the more questions we ask, the more I realize that there are so many left to ask. And I guess it will necessitate another time to ask more. But today, I know that Israel and India are working on many joint projects in cybersecurity, in agriculture, in IT, in space exploration, and biotech, in counterterrorism. There, in just about every field where you need a PhD or an MD, you see Israelis and Indians working together. We only have a tiny bit of time, but I wonder if Adva could tell us just a little bit about Mashav and maybe Matan on water management, because those are two pretty big issues.
Yes, thank you. So Mashav, for those who do not know, this is an agency within the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs that deals with development, could be water, could be that Matan will speak, agriculture, education, and much more. And in India, I think, I hope you're all sitting, but the biggest Israeli Mashav project outside of Israel is, of course, in India, the largest all over the world, and it focuses on agriculture. And it's not something new. Like we speak about, the development in the recent years in the relationship between Israel and India. The relationship was always very good, and this project is already more than 10 years old, almost, and it includes more than 30 centers of excellence all over India in different states, in the north, in the south, in the center of the country. And in those centers of excellence that we established with the Indian government, the federal government, and with each state and cooperation in each state, we are having a physical center in which Israeli experts on agriculture come there with the Indian experts and build together a center which give training and lectures to the local farmers. And there they get, at the beginning, training of trainers with the experts from Israel and India to the local team. And then it's something very sustainable. The outside experts go back, and the locals run the centers and do more trainings to more farmers from more families and agronomists. And this is amazing because it has such a wide influence, not only on the people and their knowledge, but also about for their livelihood, for their day-to-day life, not only of the farmer, but of his family and extended family. And this is something marvelous. And you could see the change. You could see the change in, in the in the cucumber. You see the change, how it's bigger, cheaper, better, needs less water. And this is a project that we are very, very proud of. I recommend to everyone who's watching and has families or in
So it's I'm looking at MASHAV, Mashav.
Mashav, yes.
Yeah.
I could put in the link some more data on that, so you could scroll what's going on in India, but you could go and visit, and it's diverse, it's very different. You have mangoes, you have that. For us, it's a great honor to work on mangoes in India. You have other fruits, and it's really something. But of course, we are learning from that as well, which is really, 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 I think,
Yeah.
powerful.
We were going to, we had a technical problem because a very respected scientist, my Anurag Mairal, was going to join us, and he is a brilliant man in technology and so on, but somehow he had a technical issue and couldn't get on, and he was going to tell us,
Peggy, he's here.
Oh, he is. I can't see him. Okay.
Can you all hear me?
Yes. Oh, there you are.
I've been lurking. I wonder why I was not visible, but I've been listening to this wonderful discussion. What knowledgeable group of people here. My apologies that you couldn't see me so far, but I'm here.
So tell us a little bit about how India and Israel are working to make the world a better place.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for having me here. I've learned so much already in the last 40 minutes of the conversation. My area of expertise in focus is really in health, and especially on innovation for health. And in my journeys to Israel and my work with Israeli innovators, both doctors and engineers who have worked together with our innovators at Stanford Biodesign, which is where I work. One thing that's become very obvious to me is the energy that Israel has as a startup nation, especially in healthcare, and it's the same energy that I see in India in the program that we had created in India called Stanford India Biodesign. So there's a program called Stanford India Biodesign, and there's a program called Israel Biodesign, which actually are based on the same sort of method or process of innovation. And I think what is the remarkable opportunity that is ahead of us between Israel and India and the US is to work together to come up with innovative solutions for the world that go beyond what has been done so far. I mean, India is a very large country. It's got quite a bit of talent, but it does not have a whole lot of history of medical technology innovation. And Israel has been a pretty prolific contributor to medical technology innovation over the last couple of decades. And US has done this over a much longer duration. And I think this sort of tripartite, tri-country collaboration that we are seeing through Stanford Biodesign has been a remarkable sort of evolution for me. And you know, the opportunity that I see for Israeli innovators to work in India and Indian innovators to work with Israeli medtech innovators is that India presents a very large country with a lot of patients, a lot of clinical challenges that Israeli innovators could potentially actually get their hands on and address those needs. And you know, India is growing economically as well. So it presents a very wonderful, really wonderful place to also bring their technologies to market. And one last thing I'll quickly mention. There's this new era in digital health that's arriving in healthcare. Healthcare is one of the slowest to adopt new technologies for a good reason. And I think we see quite a bit of potential with artificial intelligence and digital health solutions. And one of the key ingredients that you need for those innovations is data. And India has a lot of patients and a lot of data that could potentially be tapped into to come up with these interesting innovations, whether you're talking about infectious diseases or you're talking about lifestyle diseases such as heart disease and diabetes. And so I'm just kind of summarizing a lot of work that is going on and a lot of possibilities that exist in the future in just a few comments here.
Thank you. There's so much to cover, and whatever we've done so far, the potential is even greater. I don't think we can even imagine what the potential is. Asaf, I don't know if you've seen any questions from participants. You can call on them if you have. I don't have the ability to
have lots of questions. Well, there was an interesting question from Padma. The question was, are there any Hindus, Indians in Israel aside from the diplomatic community, and how many?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, the question was, are there any Hindus or Indians in general in Israel aside from the diplomatic community? And if there are, how many are they?
Matan, do you want to answer? I see you're not with the mute.
Sure, yes. I'll just say there are a lot of them. You know, Israel is a booming high-tech and innovation country, and there's a lot going on in that field, where you have engineers from India working in Israeli companies, both in India and in Israel. There's presence of Indian business people. There's a lot going on in terms of trade, and we just touched upon a short number of topics, but there's a lot going on in that. So yes, obviously, like you said, the Jewish Indian community, that's huge. So there is not a lot. We're talking about maybe dozens or hundreds. Also in the area of diamonds, there's a lot going on between India and Israel. But there is some Indian presence, Hindu Indian community in Israel.
I will just add, if I may, that also, I don't know if you know, but there's not a lot of foreign students in Israel in general. It's something we're trying to do more. So first of all, you're welcome to come and study in Israel. I think now it's quite more than an attractive destination than the usual after our vaccination operation. But even before that, I'm joking, even before COVID-19, we don't have a lot of international students. It's something we're working a lot on. And the biggest population of international students are Indian students who are coming to study in Israel. So that's another population, very important, very young, very academic, that we engage with, and it's a pleasure to have them in Israel.
So this has gone very quickly. For me, it has. And I thought maybe one or two of the guest speakers would want to answer, why should India be important to Jews, not just Jews who lived in India, but all Jews, and why should Israel be important to Hindus? So it's a big question, but I'm looking for a short answer.
May I take a quick crack at that as a non-expert in this space? You know, I have come to recognize the value and the spirit of these two great religions and the two great people over a period of time. It's not been an immediate aha for me when I was younger, but over a period of time. And I think one thing that has become very obvious to me as I have traveled the world and I've worked globally in my current role, is that these two cultures and these two religions and these two peoples actually represent probably the best hope for our future, our society's future. Our society faces some tremendous challenges, and when I'm mentoring high school students, which I've started to do last few years, and as a professor, I realize that our challenges of the future are going to be much greater than the ones that we have tackled so far. My generation and the previous generations have tackled, and you need these two cultures and these two religions and these two peoples to really provide light up the way forward for us, rooted in this generosity of spirit and this openness to everybody and tolerance and acceptance of the diverse points of view. I think we absolutely need us, Hindus and Jews in India and Israel, to work together to that future. And I worry that if we don't, opportunity is ahead of us, but if we are not able to tap into that opportunity, if we are not able to sort of build upon this wonderful gathering that we have and other engagements that we have had, we would miss out on a really important opportunity for our world. So this is a non-expert's view.
It is a very expert view. It is very expert. Anybody else want to comment on?
I would like to.
Yes.
Am I there? I think I'm.
Yeah, you're on.
Okay, I'm sorry for the delay. This is a little bit outside the box, but that's my field. We Jews globally are still damaged people after the Shoah. And we've lost something. We've lost a bit of our hearts and worse. And not just personally, though it is personal, but for many, many significant people, that emptiness led them to India to find something deep in here, and they found it. But they didn't stay in India, and they didn't stay in a Hindu world, particularly. They came back. And they brought whatever that intangible is that was lost to them after the Shoah, and that somehow idiosyncratically got restored to them through their travels and experiences. I think that is, we can witness a revival is too big a word, but an upsurge in a depth of Jewish commitment, spiritual, religious, that they're the only areas I'm talking about that I know about. I think it's undoubtedly there, and I think it has a great deal to do with India. And that conversation is it's a tikkun, it's a repair of the fissure in the world between East and West, nothing less than that.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. I'm sorry.
So the one thing that I have been seeing as I'm getting to look at the chats is we need more, we need more, we need more. This is just the beginning. And I agree. So first, I want to thank our outstanding panelists. You opened new visions, doors, thoughts, and that is always a great gift. I want to thank you to our partners. We work together a lot at HAF and our supporters from VHPA and Hindu PAC. I treasure working together with you. And I want to say that this should be the beginning of many more conversations, because we only skimmed the surface of what we have in common and what we can do together, not only to benefit our communities, but to benefit the whole world. So everybody on this meeting here will be getting a thank you note from me. And if we can, and if you want to reach out to us, if you say, yeah, this is a great conversation and I want to be part of more of this, if you put that last screen up again, to reach out to HAF and to stand with us. You have our contact there. We gave you our personal emails, so this is not going to go through later. And we are now working on what will hopefully very soon be our next conversation of friends that are continuing to become greater friends and cooperate. And thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Asaf, for making this all work out technologically. And I look forward to our next meeting to be even more profound. Good night. Have a wonderful evening.
Dhanyavad. Thank you.